Inside a packed Southern courtroom, the tension was thick even before the proceedings began. Wooden pews creaked under the weight of whispers and shifting bodies. Eyes turned as the doors opened, and an elderly black man entered in full military dress. Sergeant Elijah Ford's uniform was pristine. Its most striking feature, the unmistakable blue ribbon and gold star of the Medal of Honor resting over his heart. Some spectators nodded in silent respect. A few younger veterans subtly stood and saluted, but not everyone was moved. Others scoffed, rolled their eyes, or nudged each other with barely disguised contempt. To them, Elijah was either a relic of a different era or a symbol they weren't ready to acknowledge. The courtroom was not on trial today, at least not officially. The case at hand was about a shady land deal where a powerful developer was accused of swindling land from disabled veterans. Elijah had been called as a key witness. He'd fought not only on foreign soil, but back home, defending the rights of the forgotten. Presiding over the case was Judge Raymond Calloway, a towering man in his 70s with a deep Southern drawl and a long bench record. He was respected, yes, but feared more. Known for his rigid decorum, short temper, and opinions that often felt like echoes from a darker past. As Elijah took the witness stand, all eyes shifted. The weight of his uniform and his words were expected to carry undeniable credibility. But just as the clerk was about to swear him in, the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Ford," Judge Calloway said, voice dripping with disdain, "this is a court of law, not a parade. Remove that medal. You're not here to impress anyone." The room fell into a stunned silence. Cameras weren't allowed, but phones buzzed in laps and fingers hovered over record buttons. Elijah didn't flinch. He looked the judge square in the eye and replied, calm and firm, "Sir, I wear this not for show, but for those who never came home." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman gasped. A man in uniform muttered, "That's damn right." The judge's face tightened with offence. With no sign of compliance, he banged his gavel harshly. "Remove the medal or I'll have the bailiff do it for you. This is your last warning." The bailiff hesitated, looking torn. Elijah slowly unpinned the medal himself and placed it in his lap with care, like laying down a flag over a grave. No dramatics, no defiance, just the quiet sorrow of dignity being stripped. He looked out at the crowd, not in anger, but in grief. What should have been a standard court proceeding had already begun rewriting itself into something else, something larger, something irreversible. Outside the courtroom, the air was electric with tension. Reporters surged forward the moment Sergeant Elijah Ford stepped out. Their microphones extended like spears. The once orderly hallway dissolved into chaos. Cameramen jostled for the best angle. Journalists shouted over each other, demanding a statement. But Elijah said nothing. His eyes looked far away, as if he were back on the battlefield, not physically, but emotionally. In his weathered hand, the Medal of Honor rested loosely, no longer on his chest, but still heavy with meaning. He didn't hold it like a trophy, he held it like a folded flag. Flashes popped. One photo, captured by a local freelance photographer, would soon become the image seen around the world. Elijah standing alone, surrounded by press, clutching the medal with a solemn look that said more than words ever could. By sunset, the video of Judge Calloway ordering Elijah to remove his medal had been uploaded across platforms. It exploded. Within hours, hashtags like #Medal of Honor and Elijah deserves respect and honor our heroes began trending globally. TikToks were created. Veterans stitched the moment with their own stories of service. On Twitter, thousands of verified users, including actors, senators, and decorated military personnel, called it one of the most disgraceful moments ever captured in a courtroom. Veterans organizations, spanning all backgrounds and generations, united in condemnation. The American Legion, Black Veterans Project, Latino Veterans Leadership, and Native Warrior Alliance all released statements demanding an apology from the court and calling for an investigation. One decorated Marine posted, "That judge didn't just disrespect a man, he disrespected all of us. Sergeant Ford didn't wear that medal to boast. He wore it because too many of us can't anymore." Anonymous sources from the Pentagon confirmed to news outlets that Elijah's Medal of Honor was awarded after he saved 12 men during a firefight in Afghanistan. He had shielded them from gunfire after their position was ambushed. He took 2 bullets and lost his leg, but never lost contact with command. His actions had turned certain death into survival. More hauntingly, records also surfaced showing that after returning home, Elijah had spent years advocating for mental health services and housing programs for veterans, rarely speaking about his own heroics. Still, Judge Calloway remained firm in his stance. In a brief interview aired on the local news, he looked straight into the camera and said, "This court bows to law, not to medals. There will be no exception." His words only stoked the fire. Late-night hosts blasted him. Military spouses wrote open letters. Protesters began to gather outside the courthouse, not with chants, but in silence. Many in uniform, standing still, wearing medals of their own. The disrespect didn't end at the bench. It had echoed into the hearts of millions, and the public was no longer quiet. In the days that followed, the small southern town became the eye of a national storm. What had started as a legal proceeding turned into a moral battlefield, and the community was caught in the middle. At Murphy's Diner, where retirees usually argued about sports or weather, now debates over dignity and law filled the booths. Half of the regulars insisted that a courtroom had to remain neutral, free from emotional displays, no matter who was testifying. The other half slammed their coffee mugs down, furious at what they called a public shaming of a hero. In churches, Sunday sermons took on unexpected tones. Some pastors spoke of humility, arguing that Elijah should have followed the judge's orders to maintain courtroom decorum. Others invoked scripture, "Give honor to whom honor is due," calling the judge's behavior a sin against service and sacrifice. Veteran bars, that usually stayed quiet during political debates, buzzed with outrage. Former soldiers, young and old, white and black, conservative and liberal, gathered in growing numbers, planning silent marches, candlelight vigils, and flags flown upside down in distress. Amidst the noise, one voice stood out. Dana Phillips, a 30-something lawyer with sharp eyes and quiet strength, had kept to herself for years. But the incident stirred something old and personal in her. Her late father had served under Elijah Ford in Afghanistan. She remembered Elijah visiting her house after her father died, bringing medals, telling stories, treating her like she still had family. Dana posted a single tweet, a photo of Elijah holding her baby self, with the caption, "The man you humiliated taught my father what honor looked like. Now I'm here to teach you what justice means." The post exploded online. Within a day, Dana was invited to speak at town halls, rallies, and even cable news interviews. But she didn't want a spotlight. She wanted change. At the next city council meeting, what was supposed to be a small community forum turned into a packed, silent demonstration. Rows and rows of veterans walked in, wearing their full-dress uniforms. Some needed canes. Some came in wheelchairs. One held up a photo of Elijah with the words, "He carried us. Now we carry him." The mayor looked overwhelmed. The council struggled to maintain order, but the message was clear. Elijah Ford wasn't just a man anymore. He had become a mirror reflecting who people were, or weren't, willing to respect. Still, through it all, Elijah himself remained almost invisible. He declined interviews, ignored camera crews camped outside his modest home. Instead, he quietly visited VA hospitals, bringing coffee and playing chess with amputees and PTSD survivors. He said little, just showed up and listened. When asked why he wasn't speaking publicly, he only replied, "I already said what mattered, and they heard it loud enough to be afraid." Meanwhile, a national petition demanding Judge Calloway's resignation began to gain traction. It hit 500,000 signatures within 48 hours. By the end of the week, it passed 2 million, and still rising. Lines had been drawn, not just in court, but in kitchens, on porches, in hearts. The town wasn't just divided by opinion anymore. It was divided by memory, principle, and the question that hung in the air like smoke. What, in America, is the proper way to honour a hero? Behind the heavy oak door of Judge Calloway's chambers, silence replaced the noise of public fury. Stacks of legal briefs and framed citations lined the room, but they couldn't drown out the ringing of his own conscience. The gavel that once felt like an extension of his authority now lay untouched, cold and useless. Judge Raymond Calloway had been a fixture in the legal world for over 30 years. He had survived scandals, shifted with changing politics, and endured more than one reform wave. But this was different. The cameras outside weren't going away. The calls to resign weren't quieting. His name wasn't just on court dockets anymore. It was trending on every social platform. Late at night, when no one was around, Calloway stared at an old photograph on his bookshelf. His father, Lieutenant Henry Calloway, stood tall, in a faded Wabu Tutu uniform, a proud man, a silent man, a black soldier in a segregated unit who came home to no parades, no medals, no thank you speeches, just a janitor's mop and the burden of knowing he fought for a country that didn't fight for him. Raymond had idolized him, but he'd also internalized his bitterness. In his mind, the military was a contradiction, honor wrapped in hypocrisy. He'd built his entire philosophy of the law around that tension. That dignity had to be earned in court, not inherited from symbols or uniforms. And somewhere along the way, he began to see medals as vanity, as distractions from the law's cold, clean logic. But his colleagues had begun whispering. Privately, one warned him, "You're becoming the story, and not the kind that ends well." Another added, "This isn't about the law anymore. It's about decency." Still, Calloway bristled at every interview request. He released one statement. "I will not be lectured by people who don't understand the sanctity of the bench." But behind closed doors, cracks began to show. He found himself reviewing old cases, some that he'd dismissed too quickly. A Latina mother he ruled against without hearing her full testimony. A young black man he'd sentenced harshly for a non-violent offence. A woman who broke down on the stand. He remembered mocking her emotional state in open court. He had worn the robe for so long, he forgot what it was meant to protect. Then came the confrontation he didn't expect. His daughter, Kendra. Kendra Calloway, a journalist living in Atlanta, stormed into his house one night and dropped a newspaper on his desk. It showed Elijah Ford, medal in hand, face weary and dignified. "Do you even see this man?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That medal doesn't just honour him, it honours every man who never got one. Like your father. You think you shamed a showboat? No, you shamed a legacy." He tried to respond, but she cut him off. "That man wore his medal so you could wear your robe." The words didn't leave his ears. They echoed long after she slammed the door behind her. Alone in the dark, Judge Calloway looked again at his father's picture, the old uniform, the hard eyes, and for the first time in decades, he wept, not from guilt, but from the terrifying realization that in trying to uphold the law, he may have destroyed what little legacy his own father left behind, and that the world wasn't trying to cancel him. It was simply remembering someone else better. The marble halls of Capitol Hill had hosted countless hearings over the years, but none quite like this. That morning, the chamber was fuller than usual. Senators, aides, journalists, and even a few veterans sat shoulder to shoulder. waiting for a man whose name had travelled from a quiet courtroom to the national stage. Sergeant Elijah Ford entered wearing a simple grey suit, not his uniform. But the Medal of Honor was back on his chest, this time at the request of Congress. He walked slowly, using a cane, his limp a quiet reminder of the cost of service. Cameras clicked, pens scratched, but Elijah barely noticed. He wasn't there for attention. He was there because something had cracked in the American conscience, and he was being asked to speak into the silence that followed. When he took the oath and sat at the witness table, the room stilled. He didn't use grand language or dramatic tone. His voice was calm, low, deliberate. "I was asked to remove my medal," he began. "A medal that doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to the men who died in a ravine in Helmand Province, to the medics who saved what was left of my leg, to the families who were handed folded flags instead of open arms." He paused, then looked up directly at the panel. "We wore uniforms so you could wear suits. We fought in silence so you could speak in peace. And yet, even now, some of us must still earn our humanity in rooms that would not exist without our sacrifice." There was no applause, just a deep, resonant silence, the kind that lives in the bones of those who've heard truth without permission. News outlets broadcast the full testimony. Social media once again erupted, but this time not in outrage, in admiration. Elijah's quiet strength struck a chord in a fractured nation. Liberals and conservatives, civilians and veterans, white and black, urban and rural, each found something in his words that felt like a mirror. The next day, a bipartisan coalition introduced a bill titled the Veteran Dignity Act. Its mission was simple: to ensure the rights of decorated veterans in civilian institutions, from courtrooms to public schools to government offices. It also proposed training judges and civil servants on the cultural and legal significance of military honours, especially for historically marginalised veterans. One senator remarked during the press briefing, "Elijah Ford reminded us that dignity doesn't come from law, it inspires it." Editorials across the country praised him. Veterans groups asked him to speak at national conventions. Schools began adding Medal of Honor history to their civics curriculum. But Elijah remained modest. When asked by a reporter how it felt to become a national symbol, he replied, "I didn't ask for that. I just told the truth." Meanwhile, quietly and without fanfare, the State Bar Association received a formal complaint against Judge Callaway. The allegations included judicial misconduct, abuse of discretion, and violation of veteran civil rights. Though he hadn't yet resigned, the machinery of accountability had been set in motion. Elijah never celebrated that. He didn't smile at the news or comment on the judge again. He had said all he needed to, and the country was finally listening. The atmosphere inside the state capitol's grand chamber was sharp with scrutiny. Cameras lined the walls, but silence reigned. It wasn't a courtroom this time, but an ethics review board, assembled under emergency motion to determine the fitness of Judge Raymond Callaway to continue serving the bench. A panel of 5 senior legal authorities sat behind a long desk, solemn and alert. Facing them was Judge Callaway, no longer in robes, just a tailored grey suit that did little to hide the tension in his jaw. His eyes looked weary but stubborn. This was a man not used to defending himself. Across the room stood the complainant's representative, Dana Phillips, poised, professional, and unshaken. She carried no notes, no theatrics, only the gravity of the moment and the stories of those she spoke for. The lead board member called the hearing to order. "Judge Callaway," the voice echoed, "you are here under allegations of judicial misconduct, stemming from your order that a Medal of Honor recipient remove his decoration while testifying in open court. Do you have a statement before we proceed?" Callaway stood, hands clasped behind his back. He cleared his throat. "I have served the law for over 3 decades. I have upheld standards, not emotions. What I did in that courtroom was not personal. It was procedural. I was defending the dignity of the bench, not attacking a man. Dana rose slowly, stepped forward and addressed the panel. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "This is not a question of law. This is a question of humanity, of what the law is supposed to protect." She clicked a remote. A screen lit up behind her. The first image, Elijah Ford, standing in court, medal in hand, dignity stripped yet posture unbroken. Then came another slide, his Medal of Honor citation, for gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, and another, testimonials from soldiers whose lives he saved, from their families, from hospital staff he now visits weekly without media attention. Judge Calloway didn't just order a man to remove a medal, Dana continued. He ordered a nation to forget who it's supposed to honor, and he did it with the weight of the law, knowing full well that silence would fall hardest on someone who deserved the loudest gratitude. Calloway's expression flickered, a tremor in the jaw, a twitch near the temple, but he said nothing. Then came the moment everyone had waited for. Elijah Ford stood up from the observers' row, slowly, with help from his cane. The room adjusted, breaths held. He didn't speak from rage. His voice was soft, weathered, full of the years it had taken to earn the very thing that was torn from him. "I didn't come here to punish anyone," he began. "I didn't wear that medal to elevate myself. I wore it so that those who didn't come back, the ones we left in the sand, the ones who screamed last words into radios, would not be forgotten." He took my medal from my chest. A pause, but not from my soul. The entire room stayed still. Even the panelists blinked slower, as if stunned by the grace of a man who'd seen war, survived silence, and still chose mercy. Elijah looked at Calloway, not with contempt, but with something closer to grief. "I forgive you," he said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequence." The board retired briefly. When they returned, the chair didn't hesitate. "This panel, by unanimous vote, finds Judge Raymond Calloway guilty of judicial misconduct and recommends immediate termination and disbarment. Effective immediately, you are no longer authorized to serve on the bench." Calloway sat still for a moment. No argument, no words, just a long, slow breath, as if the robe he no longer wore had been the only thing keeping him upright. He rose, nodded once, and walked out. The gavel of his career had fallen for the last time. The sun rose gently over the military base that morning, casting golden light across the polished boots and crisp uniforms of men and women who had come from all corners of the country. Flags flapped softly in the breeze. Bugles were tested and silenced. Rows of chairs had been placed in perfect alignment before a raised platform bearing a single microphone, a wreath and one empty seat marked with a blue ribbon. The occasion was neither a funeral nor a promotion, but something rarer. A public restoration, a reckoning wrapped in honor. Sergeant Elijah Ford, now 73, sat quietly among the front row, his cane resting across his lap, his suit simple, and his Medal of Honor once again pinned to his chest. But it wasn't the same medal that had been stripped from him in court. That one remained in a private case, its ribbons slightly torn, its meaning forever shifted. This medal, a pristine replica, was presented not as a replacement but as a reaffirmation, not of military rank, but of dignity. Before the ceremony began, a White House representative approached and handed Elijah a sealed letter. He opened it slowly and read the words inside, written in the president's own hand. "Your Grace, in the face of humiliation, reminded us that honor isn't conferred by medals. It's revealed by character. Thank you for reminding a divided nation what service truly looks like." He folded it carefully, slid it into his pocket, and remained still. The national anthem played. Then came the roll call of names. Those who had served with Elijah, those who had not returned, and those who had returned broken. The names were read slowly, reverently. Veterans stood at each one. Some saluted, some cried, some closed their eyes and whispered prayers no one else could hear. When Dana Phillips took the stage, the crowd quieted with reverence. She spoke only a few words. This medal is not for show, it's a mirror. And today we return it not to a hero, but to a man who never asked to be one. She gently stepped down and handed the replica medal to Elijah. He didn't rush. He stood slowly, took it in his hands, and turned to face the hundreds gathered before him. Soldiers, senators, children, elders. Then he walked to the microphone. His voice was as steady as it had been in that courtroom, but softer now. Not because it was weak, but because it didn't need to be loud. I've been thanked too many times for surviving, but today I want to thank those who didn't. I want to thank the ones who were never honoured, the ones who came home to no parades, the ones who died waiting for care. This isn't just for me. This is for every soldier who returned home in silence, and for those who never did. The audience stood in silence, not clapping, not shouting, just standing, listening, holding space for a truth they hadn't heard in years. Behind Elijah, a large flag billowed in the wind. A photographer captured the moment. Elijah standing still, his hand resting over his heart, the sun haloing his profile. It would become a new image, not viral this time, historic. The courthouse that once echoed with tension, judgment, and shame now stood silent, its windows boarded, its halls emptied. The building was being decommissioned, not just as a structure, but as a symbol of a system that had, for too long, forgotten who it was supposed to serve. In its place, rising from newly laid foundations just a mile away, stood a shining new centre of justice, the Sergeant Elijah Ford Veterans Justice Hall. The name wasn't a political gesture, it wasn't a PR move, it was a correction, a course adjustment, written in stone and sealed by the collective will of a grateful community. On the day of its dedication, crowds once again gathered, not in protest, but in celebration. Children held small flags, veterans in wheelchairs lined the front rows, and Elijah Ford, now revered as a living legend, walked slowly toward the building bearing his name. Inside the grand lobby, beneath vaulted ceilings and glass skylights, hung a portrait unlike any other in the building, not one of scales or gavels or black robes. It was Elijah, seated in a chair with a warm smile, surrounded by children of every colour and background, their eyes wide with wonder as he told stories not about war, but about hope, unity, and healing. There were no medals visible in the painting, only the presence of a man who had become more than a hero. He had become a compass. The dedication ceremony was brief but unforgettable. At its centre stood Judge Dana Phillips, now swearing in as the youngest circuit judge in the state's history. She didn't speak long, but she did say this: "Justice is not a robe, it's a responsibility, and I wear this today because a soldier chose mercy over pride and reminded a nation of its better self." Then she turned to Elijah, holding out the ceremonial robe. With trembling hands, he lifted the fabric and gently placed it across her shoulders, pinning the seal into place. The same hands that had once been ordered to remove a symbol were now trusted to bestow one. After the applause faded, Elijah walked alone to the east wing of the new courthouse, where a wall of names had been etched in marble, the wall of the forgotten. It bore the names of overlooked veterans, men and women of every war, every background, who had never received medals, never had their stories told. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out the replica Medal of Honor. Not the original, not the one that had been taken, but the one that had been returned by a nation that finally understood. He knelt and placed it at the base of the wall. No cameras clicked, no speeches were given, only silence and sunlight. A soft breeze lifted through the courtyard, rustling the flags above. As he stood and turned to leave, a soft voice, perhaps a narrator, perhaps a memory, spoke the final words. He walked in alone. He walked out remembered, not because he wore a medal, but because he lived what it stood for.